They're running from something they don't know how to face. And they don't even realize they're the ones fueling it. Avoidant people don't process pain as it happens. They delay it. They suppress it, lock it away, and cover it with performance. But suppression at healing, it's postponement. And every emotion that gets postponed doesn't disappear, it waits. It becomes pressure. It turns into a future collapse waiting for the right trigger. There's another layer most people overlook. Avoidance isn't just a habit. It's a philosophy of emotional survival. Many avoidant people learned early in life that closeness leads to danger. Vulnerability meant criticism, neglect, or being told they were too much. So they adapted. They built an identity around independence and self-sufficiency. They told themselves they didn't need anyone, that relying on others was weakness. But relationships expose that illusion, because no matter how distant someone tries to be, real connection forces buried wounds to rise. Love demands presence. It demands openness. And when a breakup happens, the avoidant falls back in their default setting. Disconnect, withdraw, disappear. But the discomfort doesn't go away, it spreads. That's why so many avoidant people unravel after relationships. They expect relief when they cut you off. They think distance will bring peace. Instead, it reveals how unhealed they really are. Ask yourself this. If they truly didn't care, why would they need to run so fast? Why throw themselves into distractions? Why deny the connection so aggressively? You don't run from peace. You don't numb what doesn't hurt. The avoidance itself proves unresolved emotion. It's not strength. It's an inability to stay present with discomfort. Here's the paradox. The more they avoid, the louder the silence becomes. The more they distract themselves, the more the pain whispers underneath. Avoidance doesn't protect them, it isolates them. What starts as a temporary shield slowly turns into a permanent prison if they never wake up. What you're seeing isn't healing. It's evasion pretending to be independence. And the longer they maintain that illusion, the further they drift from real connection, not just with you, but with themselves. So don't romanticize their distance. Don't mistake silence for closure or confidence. Understand what's really happening. It's a psychological retreat, not emotional maturity. And if you're the one sitting with your pain, asking yourself hard questions, and facing uncomfortable truths, you're the one healing. You're doing the work they're avoiding. Remember this. Silence isn't always peace. Distance isn't always strength. And the person who looks the calmest after a breakup is often the one running from the latest battle inside. You might look at your avoidant ex and think they look free. They cut you off, disappeared, and now they seem to be thriving. Posting photos, making moves, living life. But you need to understand something clearly. That freedom you're seeing isn't real. It's an illusion. And underneath it is a psychological trap they built themselves. Avoidant people don't leave relationships to feel free. They leave to regain control. Control over space. Control over emotions. Control over autonomy. But real emotional freedom doesn't come from disconnection. It comes from processing. From understanding patterns. From choosing healing instead of hiding. What the avoidant does is the opposite. They avoid inner work by projecting a life that looks liberated while remaining emotionally fragmented. When someone avoids intimacy out of fear, their freedom is actually emotional exile. Yes, they escaped vulnerability. Yes, they escaped closeness. But they also cut themselves off from growth, meaning, and connection. You don't grow by avoiding pressure. You don't grow by allowing love to stretch you, challenge you, and expose what's underneath your defenses. Avoidant people confuse independence with peace. What they're really clinging to is predictability. In emotional closeness, things feel chaotic. Emotions collide. Insecurities get triggered. They feel out of control. So they retreat to environments they can manage. No emotional mess. No accountability. No one questioning their distance. Just silence and space. But silence and space don't heal wounds. They bury them. Philosophically, this isn't freedom. It's denial. They deny their capacity for intimacy because it threatens the ego they build around in vulnerability. But the human need for connection never disappears, even for the avoidant. especially for them. That's why after all the running and pretending, they feel an emptiness they can't explain. Their soul didn't want escape, it wanted safety. And instead of building safety through connection, they chose avoidance for short-term relief. You think they're living better without you, maybe on the surface. But look deeper. They didn't leave because they were strong. They left because they didn't know how to stay. There's a difference between choosing solitude with clarity and defaulting to isolation because intimacy feels threatening. This is why many avoidant people stay stuck in cycles of unfinished emotional business. They move from one connection to another, never fully letting anyone in. You can't let someone in when you've spent your whole life guarding the door. That emotional all doesn't protect them. It starves them. It starves them a closeness of love, of real peace. Not the kind you post online. So if you find yourself envying their so-called freedom, stop. What they have isn't freedom, it's emotional quarantine. And while they sit in that self-made isolation trying to convince themselves they're fine, you have the chance to grow, to face pain, and to become whole. The person who runs from connection isn't free. They're lost without direction and without a path forward until they choose to turn inward. Let's challenge another illusion that keeps people stuck after a breakup with an avoidant. You assume their silence means they're gone, that they erased you as easily as they disappeared. But here's the truth. They're watching, quietly, consistently, from a distance. You can't see them, but they can still see you. Avoidant people are experts at suppressing emotions, not deleting them. That difference matters. They don't process feelings the way secure people do. They suppress and compartmentalize. They try to control when and how emotions surface and what they're exposed to. But the irony is the more they try to push you out of awareness, the more the subconscious pulls you back in. That's why they check your profiles, watch your stories, hover silently. They do it to maintain control. After the breakup, observing you from afar lets them feel connected without risk. It feeds curiosity without vulnerability. It reassures the ego without accountability. They don't watch because they're ready to reconnect. They watch to validate their decision, to see if you're still affected, to check if they still matter. They want reassurance without relationship, attention without responsibility. This comes from a deep contradiction. They fear closeness, but they crave significance. They live in emotional limbo, not with you, but not fully gone either. They disappear, then haunt. They don't want to be with you, but they can't tolerate the idea of you moving on. And once you understand that silence isn't absence but strategy, everything shifts. You stop chasing, you stop questioning your worth. You stop misreading silence as strength. While they watch from the background, you heal in the open. And when they circle back, many do, they'll find a version of you they can't reach. Not because you're bitter, because you're free. Let this land. They watch because you still matter, and they don't know how to face what they lost without facing themselves. Now let's talk about something most people never expect. The avoidant doesn't actually know what to do with themselves once you truly go silent. They believe silence will bring relief. They expect control. They assume the emotional noise will disappear the moment you're gone. But when your voice fades, when your messages stop, when your energy pulls back without drama or explanation, they enter a psychological space they are completely unprepared for. Because here's what's happening underneath. Avoidant people rely on your emotional engagement more than you realize, not because they want intimacy, but because your presence reinforces their identity. When you chase, when you explain, when you try to fix things, it confirms their belief that closeness is dangerous while still proving they are wanted. That contradiction feeds their ego without requiring vulnerability. But when you stop, when you go quiet not to manipulate, not to punish, but from self-respect, something inside them breaks pattern. You remove their emotional supply. And this isn't just about texting. It's your attention, your reassurance, your availability. When that disappears, the avoidant loses their emotional anchor. Yes, you were their anchor, even if they never admitted it. You held space for emotions they never learned to regulate. You made them feel significant without forcing them to grow. And now that space is gone. At first, they feel numb. But numbness isn't peace, it's delayed collapse. The nervous system can only suppress for so long before it rebels. And because avoidant people don't process emotions in real time, the breakdown doesn't arrive immediately. It sneaks in, through dreams, random memories, songs, quiet moments. Their mind reaches for you when they least expect it. And because they're not practiced at emotional awareness, they don't understand what's happening. They just feel restless, irritable, disconnected, unsettled. Why? Because the person they pushed away was regulating emotional chaos they never faced. Your silence doesn't just remove you from their life. It forces them to sit with themselves. And for someone who has spent their entire life running from inner awareness, that is terrifying. Philosophically, this is the collapse of illusion. The avoidant builds a belief that life is safer when people are kept at a distance. Your silence doesn't just disrupt habits. It destroys the fantasy. It reveals they were never as in control as they thought. That peace doesn't come from avoidance. That the absence of conflict doesn't mean healing exists. They come face to face with the truth they've avoided. You were not the problem. You were the mirror. You reflected their fear of intimacy, their discomfort with vulnerability, and their inability to hold emotional space. And now, without your presence to project onto, they must face it alone. So if you're wondering whether they feel your absence, understand this. They don't just feel it. They struggle with it. They resist it. But because they're conditioned to hide, they suffer quietly while pretending everything is fine. Your silence didn't break them. It exposed them. And in that exposure, they're forced to confront the emptiness they once blamed on you. One of the most ignored parts of the avoidant experience after a breakup is when silence turns inward. When the noise disappears, your calls, your text. Something unsettling happens inside them. And this is where the mental narratives begin. At first, there may be relief. That part is real, but it doesn't last. As days turn into weeks and you still haven't reached out, they need a story that protects them from self-awareness. And so the inner dialogue starts. Not grounded, not honest, filtered through defense and fear. Instead of thinking they pushed away someone who cared, they tell themselves you didn't care that much, or that you moved on quickly, or that you were too emotional. Why? Because believing you loved them and they rejected it is a truth they can't emotionally survive without breaking down. That realization would require accountability. It would force them to admit they sabotaged something meaningful. That they didn't know how to receive love when it was offered. That level of awareness threatens their ego structure. So they rewrite the story. You were needy. You were demanding. You weren't compatible. It's all smoke. Because as long as you're the problem, they don't have to look at the pattern that repeats in every connection. But here's what changes over time. The longer your silence lasts, the harder it becomes for them to hold on to that false narrative. Because they expected you to come back, to knock again, to chase, and when you don't, doubt creeps in. That's when the real discomfort begins. Now they're stuck between two truths. 1, you genuinely cared and walked away with dignity. 2, they may have lost something they didn't understand until it was gone. That internal conflict creates emotional instability. Not growth, but pressure. You become unpredictable. And unpredictability terrifies someone who's through emotional control. Silence becomes a mirror. And the longer they're forced to look into it, the more something aches. Not because you hurt them, but because their story starts to fall apart. While they sit with a narrative collapsing, you sit with truth. Not the ego's version, the honest one, where you showed up, loved deeply, and left when it wasn't returned. The avoidant tells themselves stories to thief. Your silence tells the truth they can't outrun. And then comes the return, not because they healed, not because they transformed, but because time, distance, and silence stripped away their sense of control, and now they face something avoidant people are not prepared for. Regret. The return isn't always dramatic. It's often subtle. A casual mess check-in. It's calculated even if unconscious. They're testing the door, seeing if access still exists. Checking if the person who once chased is still available without requiring vulnerability. Avoidant people don't return because they suddenly know how to love better. They return because your absence destabilized their ego. You stepped out of the role they assigned you, the fixer, the pursuer, the emotional caretaker, and now their old methods don't work. That's what pulls them back. Not your presence, your absence. When you stop chasing, they feel the void, not just of you, but of control. And that confusion draws them back into your orbit.